Hello Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We do all manner of dorkly videos here, whether it's about sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes. We probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today, it's another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. In this one, I'm going to take actually two subject matters that are both short and combine them into one video. The two subject matters are Beregond and the unfinished sequel to The Lord of the Rings that Tolkien was working on and decided not to finish. And that was called A New Shadow. Okay, so first, let's talk about Beregond. Beregond is maybe the most important character you never hear about from Lord of the Rings. In fact, I don't think he made it into the movies. There was a character originally named Beregond in the scripts, but I got changed to Erolus. And in fact, Erolus has one of the most awesome lines. He has the line, "It is as the Lord Denethor predicted. Long has he foreseen this doom." I'm like, oh, God, I wish I could have been the guy who had that. That's my one line. I get to say, long has he foreseen this doom. But that was not Beregond. That was Erolus, as it turned out. So, who is Beregond? Why is he important? Turns out, in the books, he actually has a lot of interactions with major players. He is a guard of the Citadel, which means, in Minas Tirith, that means he's guarding the Citadel, the top tier in the city that is Minas Tirith. The top tier, and also guarding the White Tree. So he's a city guard. He's not going to go out into combat, although he eventually does when they go attack the Black Gate, the Battle of the Morannon. But in the Battle of Pelennor Fields, he's hanging out in the city. When Pippin pledges his service to Denethor, Pippin becomes a guard of the Citadel, Knight of the Citadel. Beregond is assigned to escort him around the city, essentially. So Beregond kind of shows him the sights, is a little bit of like his mentor in the guards. So during the battle, when Faramir is being put to death by Denethor, he's still alive when Denethor puts him on this pyre and is going to light him on it, cover him with oil and light him on fire. Pippin goes and seeks out Beregond for help. Now, Beregond had a special connection to Faramir, and he had a great deal of respect for Faramir. So Pippin finds Beregond, and it's Beregond who is convinced, oh my God, they're killing Faramir. I have to stop this. So Pippin and Beregond head off back to the crypts where they're doing this burning. And Beregond actually kills a few of the king's guards along the way because he's being stopped. That's their job, is like, where do you stop here? He thinks about it. He's like, all right, I got to kill you. Bang. And so he's actually murdering king's guards to save Faramir. And he reaches the site, obviously, kills a couple of guards to keep them from putting oil on Faramir. Denethor pulls out a knife, is going to try to just finish the act himself. Beregond gets in his way and holds everybody off until they can get Gandalf and whatever. They can resolve the problem. Denethor obviously then douses himself with oil and lights himself on fire. But it is Beregond, unquestionably, who saves Faramir's life. It's then after the war when Aragorn has to deal with this, the issue of the fact that Beregond killed king's guards on hallowed ground. That is obviously punishable by death. In any other circumstance, Beregond would have been executed. Aragorn shows him mercy. He realizes why he did it was, to save Faramir's life. And also, so for that, and also for his valor in battle, he is assigned to be the king's guard for Faramir. But he's also banished from Minas Tirith. He can't come back. So he goes to Ithilien, where Faramir sets up his king. He's the Prince of Ithilien, and that's where Beregond spends his days. Interestingly, at the Battle of the Morannon, Pippin saves his life by killing a troll that was about to attack Beregond, and I think the troll falls on him. But so he has a lot of interaction with Pippin, with Gandalf, with Faramir, which means he's also interacting with Éowyn, because it's Éowyn and Faramir are in Ithilien together. So he touches, has a lot of contacts with a lot of the major players from The Lord of the Rings, yet he himself is obviously a secondary guy. Okay, so that's Beregond. Now, interestingly, he ties into this sequel that Tolkien was working on called A New Shadow. Tolkien wrote about 13 pages of this before he gave up writing it. And the 13 pages he writes center around Beregond's kid, Borlus. Beregond had 2 sons. This is the youngest of the sons, the younger of the sons, Borlus. And the idea is that the timing's a little weird. I don't know that Tolkien had fully etched out exactly where this was happening, but roughly 100 years after the War of the Ring, but also after Aragorn had passed away. So Aragorn's son is ruling Gondor at this point, Eldarion. And the idea is that enough time has passed, a century plus has passed, that the people of Gondor, men and are starting to forget the lessons of the past. And so they're just have this. It's all peaceful and everything's great, but people are getting restless, and there's this sense that there's an unease happening, and there's a cult that is now forming, a secret cult somewhere in Gondor and perhaps elsewhere. It's called the Dark Tree. You can see why it'd be called the Dark Tree. Perhaps first of all, there's roots that go everywhere, so it's kind of like an all-encompassing type. It's underground, but it spreads. And also the dark tree would be, the antithesis of the white tree, which is a symbol of Gondor and Minas Tirith. So the dark tree, I think you can think of it as something like neo-Nazis, right? They're idolizing the past. So perhaps they're, oh, hey, that Sauron had some good ideas, something like that. They're kind of bringing back kind of these, the dark ways and practicing in secret. And they've got a leader named Haramor, or at least that's what he goes by. And that's an interesting choice of name, because Haramor, there is another Haramor in Tolkien canon, and that is a guy who had lived in the Second Age, so thousands of years before, long since dead. It would not be that guy that's now here in the Fourth Age. But the Haramor of the Second Age was what they called the Black Númenóreans. So he was a Númenórean, kind of the same bloodline of sorts that Aragorn was. But there was a certain group of Númenóreans that followed Sauron, and so kind of turned evil, chose the dark side. And he was one of them. He was one of the most notable members of that group. So the fact that this guy in the Fourth Age is calling himself Haramor is probably he's noting back to this guy who was a notable follower of Sauron. So that's what I'm thinking, that this cult, the Dark Tree, has something to do with idolizing, paying an homage to Sauron's ways and his, to the ways of Mordor. A New Shadow, right? The New Shadow obviously is reference to the poem that Tolkien wrote, the 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky. Well, of course, the very end of that poem is in Mordor where the shadows lie. And so a new shadow being, hey, even without Sauron, there's still plenty of bad things happening. So Borlus, Beregond's son, he's an older guy now, because again, time has passed. He's got a garden in Minas Tirith. And he's talking, this 13 pages, he's talking to a guy who's like a younger man. I don't know the exact age. Let's say the guy's roughly 20. His name is Ceylon. And Ceylon was a childhood friend of Borlus's kid, Baralak. So Borlus is reminiscing. He remembers this guy, Ceylon, because Ceylon would come and steal fruit out of his garden. And so now it's, years later, this guy's older and they're talking, but he's like, yeah, when you were a kid, I remember I used to, scold you because you would come and pick the unripened fruit and waste it, and act in orcish ways, which it's interesting. Like that gets thrown around because I think people don't really know what orcs are particularly, and they're used as like you're a bad guy, you're acting like an orc, and so people kind of throw that term around without really knowing what it means, and so Ceylon, we get the idea that he's kind of a ne'er-do-well, kind of sinister, the youth, get off my lawn kind of guys. But he's talking to Borlus because, I guess because they have this connection of Borlus's son was a friend of Ceylon's. And Ceylon, they're talking about this idea. Hey, have you heard about this cult that's sprung up, the Dark Tree and this guy Harrimore? And Ceylon says, hey, if you want to know more about this cult, because Borlus asks him, what do you know about this? How do you, you get the feeling that Ceylon's connected to this cult. So Ceylon says, hey, if you want to know more about it, I will meet you tonight at a certain location and wear all black, and I'll take you. It sounds like he's going to take him to like a cult meeting. And that's kind of where it leaves off. So we don't see exactly what happened, but this is actually, there's a letter that Tolkien wrote where he was basically saying, I'm not going to write this anymore. And I'll just read you a little snippet of it that's kind of interesting. So this is Tolkien explaining why he's not going to write the end any more of A New Shadow. So he says, I found that even so early, when he says that, he's saying so early after the War of the Ring. So it only took 100 years. There was an outcrop of revolutionary plots about a center of secret Satanistic religion, while Gondorian boys were playing at being orcs, Ceylon, and going around doing damage. I could have written a thriller about the plot and its discovery and overthrow, but it would have been just that, not worth doing. So, first of all, Tolkien is throwing shade at thrillers there for a second. Like, I could have written a thriller, but bah. I don't know. A Tolkien thriller sounds kind of cool to me. But anyway, so there's a couple interesting things there. One, he decided this thriller about uncovering this plot just wasn't something that was gripping him to write an entire book about. But notice how he says about a center of secret Satanistic religion. He uses that word, Satanistic. Now that's interesting to me. Like, obviously, you could say Melkor, Morgoth, and Sauron, metaphors for Satan, certainly. But you would think that he would write it in terms of Sauron or Morgoth and not Satan. So what that says to me is that maybe he was thinking of bridging the gap between the events of the Third Age and like our modern age. And that these people who've forgotten what happened back in the Third Age and the War of the Ring are now kind of getting closer to our sensibilities. And so, the idea of what Satan might be or that religion might be. Anyway, it's just kind of interesting that the choice of words there, Satanistic. So I can imagine what might have happened here. So let's assume if he'd written a little bit more, I'm going to guess that Borlus decides, okay, I do want to find out what this cult's about. I'll put on the black cloak and I'll join Ceylon. And Ceylon would have taken him theoretically to see a cult meeting, and we would have gotten some reveal, whether it be Harrimore himself or some kind of like we see, whoa, this is a big, wow, that's a lot of people, or this is a really big problem. And then, as he said, this plot to discover and overthrow the Dark Tree. What that might be, I don't know. I was trying to think of people from Lord of the Rings, main characters from Lord of the Rings that would still be around after the death of Aragorn. And there's not a lot. Most of them are have either passed on or went to the west over, across the sea. There's a couple of exceptions. One, actually from the last video I did, Radagast. We don't know anything about him, whether he went back west or we don't think he went west. there's pretty good proof that he didn't. But so if he decided to stay, say at Roscabel, or stay here in Middle Earth, he would be potentially someone that the story could bump into. Another guy who might still be alive, it depends on when this is actually taking place, but definitely lived at least until Aragorn passed away, would be Gimli. And Gimli, the dwarf, is actually the only dwarf to ever get on a ship and go west, I believe. I think he's the only dwarf that was ever given that honor. But he did so after Aragorn died. Until that time, he actually was but he was put in charge of the dwarves that stayed in the Glittering Caves. And the Glittering Caves are the caves that are behind Helm's Deep. The ones where he was trapped, actually, the Battle of Helm's Deep. He then, after the war, basically took a group of dwarves and they made a settlement there. So he was the Lord of the Glittering Caves for quite a while, 100 plus years before sailing away. So he theoretically could have been in the area, and helped out. But other people to draw on might have been, so obviously you got the son of Aragorn as the king, Eldarion. You'd think he'd probably get roped into this conspiracy somehow, or trying to unravel it. He has an interest in keeping Gondor from collapsing. But also, Faramir's son is still the newest prince of Ithilien. Faramir's son was Elfwine, and so you could theoretically have the son of Aragorn and the son of Faramir trying to ferret out this information. And since Borlas is the son of Beregond was a major follower and friend of Faramir, I could see that connection might be made, that Borlas might go to Ithilien to say, hey, my father knew your father, and I have this very important information to tell you. That's my thought, my fan fiction on how the Dark Tree might have progressed. Anyway, so there you go, ladies and gentlemen. A little background on Beregond and the New Shadow. So if you've got any topics you'd like me to chat about, feel free to put them in the comments. I'd be happy to talk about a topic of your choosing. Feel free to subscribe, hit that like button. If you make a comment, I will make a comment back. That's a Dork Lord promise. So without further ado, goodbye, everybody.